My cousin raised her champagne glass before my uncle even finished speaking. She already knew what was coming. Everyone in that room did. Except, apparently, me. It was the kind of September evening that makes you remember why you love living in British Columbia. The sun was setting somewhere behind the mountains, and the light through my uncle's living room windows had turned everything golden. Catered appetizers on every surface. Cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years, suddenly, texting me like we were close. My aunt moving through the room in a new dress, touching shoulders, squeezing hands. Radiant in a way I hadn't seen her in years. I should have known something was off the moment I walked in and realized nobody had told me what the gathering was actually for. My name is Nadira, and I was 31 years old the night my family gathered to celebrate what they believed would be the final, official transfer of my grandfather's pharmacy business. I say believed because, as it turned out, they were wrong about nearly everything. Let me back up. My grandfather, Hamid Karimi, came to Canada in 1979 with almost nothing. He worked as a hospital orderly in Vancouver for 6 years before he had enough saved to take a single pharmacy course. Then another. Then a licensing exam he failed twice and passed on the third attempt at the age of 44. By the time I was born, he owned 2 pharmacies in the Fraser Valley. By the time I was 10, he owned 4. He never talked about the money. He talked about the work. He would say, in his particular mix of Farsi and English, that I grew up understanding, but never fully learned to speak. The business is not what you own. It's what you build. And what you build only matters if it outlasts you. I heard that sentence so many times as a child that it stopped meaning anything to me. I wish I had paid more attention. My grandfather had 2 children. My mother, who married a schoolteacher and moved to Kelowna, and my uncle Darius, who stayed close, worked in the business from his early 20s and became, over time, the face of Karimi Pharmacy Group to everyone who worked there, to suppliers, to the community. Darius was charming in the way that made people feel seen. He had an easy laugh and a firm handshake, and he always remembered the names of your children. People loved him. My grandfather loved him. My mother was easier to overlook. She was quieter, more cautious, the kind of person who double-checked the small things that nobody else bothered with. She helped with the bookkeeping for years while raising me on a teacher's income and never once asked my grandfather for anything. I don't think it ever occurred to her to ask. I grew up spending summers at my grandfather's house in Abbotsford. Those are the memories I hold most carefully. Early mornings at the kitchen table while he read the newspaper and I pretended to read beside him. Saturday afternoons in the back office of the Cloverdale location, doing homework while he reviewed inventory reports. He would sometimes stop reading, look over at whatever I was working on, and ask me questions. Not easy questions, not the kind adults ask children to seem interested. Real questions. About what I thought. About why I had arrived at a particular answer. About what I would do differently if I had to do it again. When I was 16, he taught me how to read a balance sheet. Not because anyone asked him to, just because he thought I should know. After university, I went into pharmaceutical operations. I worked for a regional health authority for 3 years, then spent 2 more years in supply chain management for a mid-size healthcare company based in Surrey. I wasn't working in the family business, but I understood the industry. I understood margins and licensing and vendor contracts and what happens when a pharmacy's inventory management is running 6 to 8% above optimal. My uncle's daughter, my cousin Yasmin, had a different path. She did a commerce degree, spent 2 years working for a wealth management firm in Calgary, and came back to Vancouver right around the time my grandfather's health started to decline. She moved back into his neighborhood. She showed up at Sunday dinners. She drove him to appointments. She posted photos on Instagram with captions about legacy and family that got hundreds of likes from relatives scattered across 3 continents. Nobody talked about the business in front of me, not explicitly, but I heard enough fragments at enough family dinners to piece together what everyone assumed. That when my grandfather eventually stepped back, Dariush and Yasmin would take over. It was simply understood. Yasmin had groomed herself for this. My uncle had been laying the groundwork for years. The night of the gathering, I drove down from Kelowna alone. My mother couldn't make it. She had caught a bad cold that week. So she'd asked me to go in her place and call her afterward. I remember thinking that was odd, that she hadn't pushed harder to attend, but I chalked it up to the cold and the 4-hour drive. My uncle's house was full. Relatives from as far as Toronto had apparently flown in. My cousin Yasmin was wearing a silk blouse in a deep burgundy, her hair done, her nails done, her posture the posture of someone who has been told since childhood that all of this belongs to her. She hugged me when I arrived. The hug was warm and brief, and her attention had already moved on before she finished releasing me. I found a place near the windows with a glass of sparkling water and watched the room. At a certain point, my uncle called for quiet. The conversations tapered off. He stood at the center of the room with a glass of champagne, one arm around Yasmin's shoulders, his smile wide and settled. "You all know why we're here," he said. "My father built something extraordinary. For decades, I have been privileged to help carry that forward. And now it is time to pass the torch to the next generation." He looked at Yasmin. She was already smiling, already tilted toward him, already performing the modesty of someone who knows the prize is coming. Yasmin has given the last 3 years to this family. She has made sacrifices. She has earned this. Someone started clapping. Others joined. My uncle reached into his jacket pocket and produced a key, a physical key, old-fashioned, on a ring with a small brass tag. The kind my grandfather had always used for the original Cloverdale location, the flagship. The one he'd opened in 1991. Yasmin took it with both hands. She held it up. I clapped along with everyone else. I didn't know what else to do. Then a woman I didn't recognize stood up from the far end of the room. She was perhaps 60, with reading glasses on a chain, a dark blazer, and the composed expression of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before and had long since stopped apologizing for it. She was holding a leather document folder. She waited for the room to quiet before she spoke. "My name is Rosamund Choi," she said. "I am a partner at Choi and Associates in Vancouver. I was your father's solicitor for the last 18 years. I apologize for the interruption. There is a matter that must be addressed tonight before this transfer can proceed." My uncle's smile did not disappear immediately. It receded the way a tide recedes, slowly at first, then faster. "Rosamund, I wasn't expecting." "I know," she said. "That was intentional." She opened the document folder. Inside was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with handwriting across the front, that I recognized even from across the room. My grandfather's careful, slightly slanted cursive. There was a collective stillness in the room that I had never experienced before in my life. Not silence exactly. A few people shifted. Someone's glass clinked softly against a table, but a stillness, as though everyone had taken a breath and forgotten to release it. Yasmin's hands tightened around the key, just slightly. But I noticed. My uncle cleared his throat. "What is this, Rosamund?" "These are your father's final instructions," she said. "Filed with my office 14 months ago. The instructions specify that this envelope is to be opened at the first formal gathering of the family following your father's passing, provided that gathering involves any discussion of transferring operational control of Karimi Pharmacy Group." She looked up at the room. "This gathering qualifies." Nobody spoke. Nobody challenged her. She broke the seal. She removed several folded pages, heavier paper, the kind used for formal correspondence, and smoothed them against the leather folder. Then she began to read. "If you are hearing this, then my family is together, and someone is discussing what becomes of the business I built. I expected this. I planned for it. And I want to speak to you one last time, because some of what you believe to be true is not true, and I will not let a misunderstanding become your inheritance." I felt something shift in my chest. That was his voice, his rhythm. Even in English, even read aloud by a solicitor I had never met. I could hear him. Rosamund continued. "For many years, I allowed an assumption to form in this family. I know the assumption. I am not unaware of it. The assumption is that my son and his daughter will take over this business. I allowed this assumption because I wanted to see how it would be acted upon. What I observed over the past 4 years concerns me. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's careful exhale from across it. My son Darius has given much to this company. I do not diminish that. But in the past 4 years, I have watched decisions being made in this company that prioritize appearance over function, relationship over accountability, and short-term goodwill over long-term stability. I had a pharmacist in Langley I trusted for 11 years. Let go to make room for a hire my son preferred. I watched the Abbotsford location's staffing costs rise 30% without a corresponding rise in revenue. These things were explained to me in ways that sounded reasonable. But I understand numbers. I have understood numbers my entire life. My uncle's expression had gone very still. I also watched my other child, my daughter, who asked for nothing, expected nothing, and quietly drove 4 hours to check on me more times than she has ever mentioned to anyone. And I watched her daughter, Nadira. My own name, in my grandfather's letter, in that room. I stopped breathing. Nadira never asked me for anything either. But she asked me questions. Real questions. About the dispensary contracts. About what would happen to the Cloverdale lease when it came up for renewal. About whether the Chilliwack location's walk-in numbers were actually sustainable, or whether we were subsidizing a community service with pharmacy margin. These are not questions a person asks because they want to inherit something. These are questions a person asks because they understand what something is worth and are troubled by the idea of it being wasted. Someone near the back of the room made a small sound. I don't know who. Several years ago, I began restructuring the ownership of Karimi Pharmacy Group. The operational business was placed into a family trust, governed by terms I set out with Rosamund's assistance. That trust has been active for 4 years. What is being discussed tonight? The transfer of control to Darius and Yasmin was never mine to authorize, because I transferred that authorization some time ago to the trustee I selected. Yasmin turned and looked at my uncle. My uncle was looking at Rosamund. Rosamund was looking at the letter. The trustee I selected, she read, is my granddaughter, Nadira Karimi. I have tried many times since that night to describe what the next few seconds felt like. I have not found the right description. It was not triumph. It was not satisfaction. It was something closer to vertigo, the feeling of the floor shifting under you when you thought you knew exactly where it was. Yasmin's voice broke the silence first. That's not possible. Rosamund lowered the pages and looked at her calmly. I can show you the trust documents. She doesn't even work in the business. She doesn't need to, Rosamund said. The trust specifies qualifications, not employment history. My uncle stepped forward. His voice was controlled, but only barely. Rosamund, there has to be something we're missing. Dad was. His health was not. Your father was assessed by 2 independent physicians 14 months ago when these documents were finalized, she said. He was of full capacity. He was clear and specific. I have the assessments. She opened a second section of the folder. He was also, I should tell you, entirely aware that this moment would be uncomfortable. He wrote about it. She found the passage and read it. Darius will say that this is not fair. He is not wrong. It is not fair. Life built on favoritism never is. But I am not distributing fairness tonight. I am protecting something I gave 40 years of my life to. The business does not belong to the person who is closest to me. It belongs to the person most likely to ensure that the people who work there are still working there in 10 years. I have made my decision, based on evidence, not on love. I love all of them, but I trust only one of them with this. The room was absolutely silent now. My uncle sat down heavily in a chair near the window. Yasmin was still standing, still holding the key, her knuckles pale against the brass. I stood up. I didn't plan to. My legs simply decided. I want to be clear about something, I said. Everyone looked at me. I didn't know about this. I had no idea this was what tonight was. I drove down from Kelowna because my mother asked me to come in her place. Yasmin made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I'm not here to take anything from anyone, I said. The business is a family business. It was built for this family, and that hasn't changed. What has changed is who's responsible for making sure it survives. I looked at my uncle. It was hard to hold his gaze. I did it anyway. I would like to talk to you properly, when you're ready. Not about who was right or who was wrong. About what comes next. He didn't respond. Not that night. Rosamond handed me the full trust documentation. 3 inches of paper in a bound folder with the Choi and Associates letterhead. I held it in both hands. Inside were corporate registry filings, trust activation records, property schedules for all 4 locations, and a handwritten personal note from my grandfather that Rosamond told me was not part of the formal instructions and was mine alone to read. I read it later, in my car, in my uncle's driveway, before I drove to the hotel I'd booked for the night. It was 2 paragraphs. He wrote that he had watched me for a long time, that he knew I hadn't known I was being watched, and that he was sorry for the weight he was leaving me. He wrote that the business had cost him things he hadn't anticipated, and that he hoped I would be smarter than he was about what I chose to protect and what I chose to let go. And at the end, in Farsi, the language he'd always spoken when he wanted to make sure something was truly understood. He wrote a single sentence that I will not translate here because it was meant for me, but which I think about every single day when I walk into work. The family has been slow to adjust. That's the honest version of it. My uncle took almost 2 months before he agreed to meet with me. Yasmin didn't speak to me directly for nearly 4 months. There were phone calls from relatives I barely knew, some supportive, some not. My mother cried when I told her, and I still am not entirely sure if they were happy tears or frightened ones. Probably both. But the Cloverdale location had its best quarter in 6 years last spring. The Langley pharmacist came back. Different role, but he came back. I hired an operations consultant to assess the Abbotsford situation, and we've already started restructuring the staffing model. My uncle comes by the Cloverdale office, occasionally now. We have a standing meeting on the 2nd Tuesday of each month. He knows this business better than almost anyone alive, and I would be a fool not to use that. I told him so, directly. He didn't say much in response, but he didn't stop coming to the meetings. Yasmin sent me a message 3 weeks ago. Just a few lines. She said she had been angry, that she still wasn't sure she fully understood it, but that she could see the locations were being managed differently. She didn't say better, but she didn't have to. My grandfather used to say, "The business is not what you own, it's what you build, and what you build only matters if it outlasts you." For a long time, I thought he was talking about the pharmacies. I understand now that he was also talking about me.